All right, this is the introductory screencast for week 3. It's an introduction to medieval England and medieval English. We ended our discussion last time with the conquering of England by William, Duke of Normandy, thereafter William the Conqueror. After this, England, its language, and its literature moved under the sway of the continent and of classical sources in a way that it never had before. William himself spoke French, as did his court, and it would be nearly 200 years before a transformed English, one recognizable as such even by modern readers, would become the official language of the country. In addition, while much of the early Old English writing we have must have been provided by educated ecclesiasts, the writing of the church was more thoroughly dominated by Latin as William began promoting various church figures from the continent to positions of power in England. Thus, the entirely Germanic Anglo-Saxon, with its few imported Scandinavian terms from Danish invaders, fell under tremendous pressure to change from both internal and continental sources. While the Anglo-Saxon Old English and its literary forms remained vibrant in rural communities and outer cities, in London and other major Norman centers, the language transformed itself under international influence. The growth of towns and trade of imported continental forms by the Norman court, and by the growth of native English speakers educated in the continental classical tradition and in continental languages, led to the growth of the Middle English, most famously present in Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. England had been formerly a nearly entirely insular nation, but with the advent of the Norman conquest, ties to the continent led to its heavy involvement in Europe, particularly in France during the period from 1066 to 1485, the English medieval period. Henry II, Plantagenet, who married the divorced wife of the King of France, Eleanor of Aquitaine, claimed a huge parcel of lands in France, and soon the English and French monarchies were deep in the 100 Years' War, fought primarily over who would rule in France. These added connections to the continent brought a flood of continental, medieval, and Renaissance literary influences, and a clear indication of the new international cultural exchange. The Celtic oral tales of King Arthur grew into the greatest single source of medieval romance, both in England and on the continent, and dominated French and English imaginative literature throughout the period. In addition, continental influences, particularly from the Italian, came to England, especially Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, Petrarch's Italian sonnet series, and Giovanni's Decameron, a direct stylistic structural predecessor of Chaucer's own Canterbury Tales. While it is unproven that Chaucer read and encountered Boccaccio, the shared tales that appear in both of their collections of stories and the similar structure of a frame story with individual tales seems, at least to me and to many other scholars, indicative of direct influence. Chaucer lived to see England become the dominant and official tongue in what had been a trilingual land. The court and nobility spoke French, the church Latin, and the commoners English. In 1362, when Chaucer would have been approximately 19 years of age, English was declared the official language of the land, and by 1386 it had replaced French as the dominant language taught in schools. This is a much changed English, having, through linguistic evolution and the influence of various outside languages, moved much in the direction of the early modern English Shakespeare and other Elizabethans would be using in the 16th century. This slide shows the first 18 lines of the general prologue as they would have looked in the English in which Chaucer wrote them. Read as best I can in that Middle English, they say the following. One that April with his shore sota, the drought of March hath pierced to the rota, and bathed every vine in switch liqueur, of which virtue engendered is the flour. One's a fairy sake with his sweet breath, and spirit hath in every holt and heath. The tender croppice and the young song have in the rams have corsied on, and smaller fowls mocking melodie that slepen all the night with open ear, so pricking him nature and her courages. Then longing folk to go on pilgrimages, and Palmares for to saken strange strondes, to ferne halwes, coth in sundre landes, and specially from every sheere's end of England to Canterbury they vend, the holy blissful martyr for to sake, that him hath holpen when that they were sake. While clearly we have not yet reached the early modern English of Shakespeare, shown here with Sonnet 19 as Shakespeare would have spelled it. We have come a long, long ways from the Anglo-Saxon in which Beowulf was written. Here is a quote from Beowulf from the beginning, which reads as follows. Whet Wegardena en Gerdagum, Theod Seninga Thrim Gefrunon, Hu thy Thalingas Ellen Fremedon, Oft shield chafing, shield thena threatum, Monegum megthim, meodo setla of tea, Exode orla, Sithan erist werth, Fiaschaft funden, Hethes frofrege bed, Weox under volknum, weorth mindum tha, Odd thet im heglel, thera im sitendra, Offer ronrade, hieren skolde, gomban gilden, Thet wes god sinning. Deme fera wes efter sened, Geongen geardum thone gorsende, Folse to frofra, fieren the arfa ongiat, Thet je drugon oldor lieza, Longe while him thes lifrea, Buldras realsdend woroldare forgiaf. And so we move into Middle English, where we can see, especially in lines like In spirit hath in every holt and heath, the tender croppice and the youngest song, and especially from every shear's end, we can see the English that we speak. Not quite as clearly as in Shakespeare, but Chaucer is well on his way, as the London dialect was at the time, to being the mainspring for our modern English.